Just hear me out, okay? I'm based off of Robin Hood, and you're named after him. Really, you should be my sidekick. I'm calling my dad. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, poseability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today, we're taking aim at the all-new DC Multiverse Injustice 2 Green Arrow by McFarlane Toys. Starting with the packaging, and the front's pretty boilerplate. Name and logo down here, name and logo on the side, and on the bottom we have a barcode for those who want it. But then we get to the back, and there's a few things you might notice. 1, they don't show any other available figures. 2, the promotional image takes up the entire back. 3, instead of a product shot, it's a digital render. And 4, it's really boring. Like, the figure in the box is posed more dynamically. This figure just has a sideways 1,000-yard stare like that one meme. And I normally wouldn't harp on this, but McFarlane usually does a really good job. Case in point, this Aquaman that we looked at last time. Also, just to be clear, I'm not saying it's a bad thing that they don't show other figures, I'm just pointing it out. And in general, I like a bigger promotional image. I just don't like this one. I know it's out of character and that I normally just kind of rubber stamp this part, but for packaging, I'm giving Green Arrow half a point for laziness. Moving on to presentation, and Oliver Queen stands at 7¼ inches. First things first, and this figure is based on his design from Injustice 2. As always, we have a lot of texture and fine detail. Zooming on in, we can appreciate the stitches and the buttons and the leather look. One thing I also really like is his logo. It's shaped like an arrowhead. He has another one down here as a substitute belt buckle. One thing you might notice is that there's no torso joint. That's because this is a rubber piece. And speaking of soft pieces, the pauldrons are nice and soft. I do really like all the gold that's been punched in. We can see some more of that on his gauntlets. We can also see that they've done a great job of hiding the wrist balls. I have to say McFarlane has been getting better and better at that, and I really appreciate it. It's hard to tell on camera, but there's a little bit of sloppiness on the inner arm. In person, you can definitely see how the green is kind of bleeding through. It's a little bit clearer on this side, but relatively speaking, in this case, it's honestly a very minor nitpick. Below the waist, and they really went to town texturing the pants. I really like these straps with the pouches and daggers. Shame they're not removable, but I get it. One small detail I appreciate are the knee pads. Action figures are notorious for not using the same plastic for their joints as they do for the rest of the body. As such, things like kneecaps can really stick out like a sore thumb. This really uses that to its advantage. And then moving all the way down to McFarlane's boot game is on point as usual. We get more of that faux leather texturing and stitch work, some laces up front, and then that lime green punched in on the sides. And then that continues down there. Kinda looks like he's wearing Velcro shoes, but once again the ankles are nicely hidden. Flipping him around and oh! As you can see, we have a peg hole for his quiver, and thanks to the flesh tone, it looks kind of painful. It's also interesting how the straps just kind of stop. Still, they did a very good job of texturing the back. So, let's talk about the head. Specifically, let's talk about the side-eye. I have made no effort to hide that I'm pretty anti-side-eye, but in this case, it doesn't bother me quite as much. If you've ever fired a bow and arrow, you'd know that you actually do look to the side. You'd also know that you use your dominant hand to pull the string back, which means that Oliver here is a southpaw. That said, I'm still kind of conflicted, but we'll get to that during playability. Otherwise, they've done a fine job. I like the coloring and shading in the hair, same with the beard and mustache, and even though I am conflicted about the side-eye, they've done a great job of stamping him on and painting his mask. He also cuts a pretty decent profile, and as you can see, has a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. I'll admit that I'm not that crazy about most of the designs from Injustice, but I actually really like this one. In fact, I might go so far as to say that this is my favorite look for Green Arrow, and McFarlane's done a fantastic job. What about you? Which Injustice character would you like to see them make next? Sound off in the comments below. As for this figure, for presentation, I'm giving Green Arrow 1 whole point. Moving on to poseability, and Green Arrow's head's on a dumbbell joint. Up this much, this far down, really great tilt, and all the way around. Swivel hinge shoulders will raise up a little bit over 90 degrees. Again, the shoulder pads move with it. No rotator cuff this time, but he does have bicep swivel, double jointed elbows, and again, very nicely hidden wrist balls that swivel and hinge. Shifting to the torso, and it's a rubber piece with articulation underneath. Between that and the dumbbell joints in his waist, and he can hunch over this far, and he can arch back this far, which is honestly pretty impressive. He can also tilt side to side and twist. Below the waist, and Ollie has the typical McFarlane hips. They kick out this far and do a perfect split. Decent amount of twist. That said, these straps would have been a perfect spot to hide a thigh cut. Moving on down though, and he has double jointed knees, toe ticulation, and McFarlane ankle balls as swivel, hinge, and pivot. Normally, the rubber torso impedes articulation, but not here. Otherwise, this is every bit as articulated as we're used to. For Poseability, I'm giving Green Arrow 1 whole point. Moving on to Playability, and Oliver comes with a trading card and a figure stand. Pause here if you want to read it. Naturally, he's all a quiver. Lots of great texture and line work. And the arrows are removable. They all come in one big green clump. A little bit of extra paintwork would have been nice, as well as a single arrow. That way you could pose them with this bow. Nicely sculpted wrapping around the handle, similar to the arrows, and it's all one solid green piece. The quiver pegs into his fleshy back hole. Probably could have phrased that better. Either way, here you go, and he can hold the bow in either hand. So remember back in presentation when I said I was conflicted about the side-eye? I argued that the side-eye makes sense because you're posing him with a bow and arrow. That, however, is not entirely the case. He's got a bow alright, and again a clump of arrows, but not only does he not have a single arrow, even if he did, he can't really pull the string back. This is pretty much the best I can do, and even that started to warp the plastic. So that classic archer pose that would have justified the side-eye isn't even possible. But Playability is more than just accessories, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. First things first, and here he is with the only Green Arrow in my collection. This figure was made by Hasbro as part of their JLA line. The series was mostly just reissues and repaints from Total Justice. And on the subject of Justice, for my only other Injustice figures, here we have Gorilla Grodd. Definitely wish he was a bit bigger. And here we have Dr. Fate. For some fellow Justice Leaguers, here we have Superman. This one is the new 52 version by DC Collectibles. Here we have the DC Essentials version, also by DC Collectibles. Here we have Action Comics 1000 from DC Multiverse. Personally, I'm pretty happy with this. Here we have Rebirth, also from DC Multiverse. And here we have Solar Suit Superman from Lois and Clark. For a couple of Aquaman comparisons, and here we have DC Essentials. Obviously, it's a bit on the short side, but here we have the all-new DC Multiverse Endless Winter. For a couple of flashes, here we have DC Essentials. He's a hair short, but he's still my favorite. And here we have DC Multiverse. I don't have a DC Multiverse Hal Jordan, but I do have John Stewart. I do, however, have Hal Jordan from DC Essentials. On the subject of DC Essentials, and here we have Wonder Woman. She's definitely a bit tiny by comparison. Here we have the new 52 Wonder Woman by DC Collectibles. Moving to McFarlane, however, and here we have Last Night on Earth. Here we have Dark Knight's Death Metal. Here we have the one designed by Todd McFarlane himself. And here we have Endless Winter. For some Batman comparisons, and here we have Detective Comics 1000. DC Multiverse has definitely come a long way. Here we have the Target exclusive Battle Damage one. This one scales pretty well. Here we have the fan favorite 3 Jokers Batman, and here we have DC Rebirth. As I said, my Aquaman review, it really all boils down to whether or not you think Batman should be taller or shorter. For the closest thing I have to a Green Arrow villain, and here we have Deathstroke. This, of course, is the Arkham Origins version. That said, for some general DC villains, here we have the Joker. I picked this one because it's a video game version. Here we have Lex Luthor in his battlesuit. Here we have Bizarro. Hopefully Ollie has a red kryptonite arrow. And here he is with Darkseid. This is the Snyder Cut version, but I use it on my comic book shelf. For that other famous comic book archer, here he is with Hawkeye. This is the Marvel Select version. For a relative scale comparison, here he is with Pete the Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man. We don't really have a whole lot of other Injustice figures for him to play with yet, but if all you want is a good generic Green Arrow for your Justice League shelf, I think this one will work just fine. I do wish that the bow was a bit more functional, but unfortunately that's how it usually works with action figure archers. It's also not a bad idea to look for some third-party options. For Playability, I'm giving Green Arrow 1 whole point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. I found Green Arrow at GameStop for $19.99. This Green Arrow really hits the mark, so if you're gonna hunt him down, definitely don't delay. For price, I'm giving Green Arrow 1 whole point for a grand total of 4.5 out of 5. For more Injustice 2 content, check out this video on Dr. Fate, or this video on Gorilla Grodd. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.